Okay, welcome back to Lost for Words with Toby and Lori. It is June 3rd, 2021.
Shit is flying by, isn't it?
It certainly is. I'm in the 50th decade of my lifetime on this planet, and we're going to take today and talk with you guys on our lovely podcast about how the metal scene has changed, specifically power metal. We kind of had a comment request from Pudel, one of our friends and band members from Mad Teacher in Poland, and he said he liked our podcast, and I thought that was pretty cool, and suggested that we talk about how the metal scene's changed over the years, and I thought that was a really interesting topic. So Toby and I are going to jaw jack at you a little bit about what we think about the trends in metal, power metal specifically, considering that's what we do and what we talk about, right?
That's right.
So that got us to thinking about a lot of stuff about power metal and about the trends. And interesting enough, you know how it is, social media, right? You belong to a bunch of groups on Facebook that deal with power metal specifically. I mean, we've got lots of different groups, right?
Right.
And we post in there, and people talk about power metal bands and music and the glory days of music, right?
Yeah, it's crazy because today's power metal, I would say today's power metal is more. You got so many divisions of power metal. You have symphonic. You have
the subgenres.
Yeah, the subgenres. And
that seems to be a great argument with a lot of people too. People want to discuss all the subgenres and put everything in a clean little box, and music isn't in a clean little box.
Well, yeah, I could see that. I mean, there's also crossovers now.
Right.
Personally, my opinion, my only opinion, people, is that if you're going to be power metal, be straight up power metal.
Well, that brings an interesting conversation that we can have another time about your definition of what straight up power metal is. Differs very much from what my definition of straight up power metal would be.
That's very true.
And, like we talked about when our second episode of Lost for Words about that line, that plus 10, minus 10, 0 mark of where it fits on a scale, because, it might fit into the box, but it might have a varying degree of crossover, like you said. So, But anyway, as we're talking about the metal scene and power metal and how it's changed, do you remember, I guess my question to you is, the first time you heard what you would define as power metal, and try to pinpoint that? What would you say?
Wow. That brings back a lot of memories. If I was to go back in my teen era, I think, to me, Iron Maiden fits that, even though it's new wave of British heavy metal, but it's still in that power metal range.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of people think, well, there's bands that went back even before that, like Halloween. Halloween, I think, is the quote very first, to my opinion, again, very first power metal band to come out that is labeled power metal.
They're very quintessential power metal. I mean, a good definition.
Right.
Right, I get it. So back in the 80s for you, it was like Iron Maiden that's power metal to you.
Yeah.
So what was going on back in the 80s when you were listening to Iron Maiden specifically? What were the trends of metal going on back in the 80s when we were listening to our power metal?
To me, it was a time of rebellion. Rebellion against the government ideas.
The man.
Yeah, the man. You had to dress a certain way. You had to be within the crowd and the cliques and all that shit. And it was time to be a rebel. And that's what heavy metal was. It was a way out of being, because you were different. You were different among the crowd.
Sure.
And I love being different. And it put me in a situation where, hey, this is what I got, and this is what I like to share with you, if you're willing to listen. Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I would say at that time the trend of being, part of that power metal culture was very anti-authority.
Yeah.
And just kind of, we do our thing, and this is what we like, and, it's different than the other sort of metal trends at that time. You had your, skater, thrash people, right. And they were, a little more political, and then you had your hair metal stuff, which was, they did their thing, and theirs was decadence and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and
That's right.
and that kind of thing. What was going on in the '80s at that time, trending wise? I mean, we had,
we had
cassette trading, and we
Yeah.
had MTV was just starting out, right? So we
Yeah.
had our videos and our Headbangers Ball
Hell
and
yeah.
and all of that. And I think for me, Headbangers Ball was a great place to find new power metal because
Yeah.
people were realizing that platform was a really great place to get noticed.
That's true.
And I do remember seeing Halloween's Halloween video and going, "What the fuck is this?" And just being like, "This is incredibly awesome."
Right.
And then it just opened up a whole brand new world of researching bands from across the ocean, really.
Right.
And seeing what was coming out of there at that time was crazy cool. And seeing stuff about festivals that were going on in Europe at that time, like Wacken Open Air. And,
Oh, yeah.
And being like, dude, And we had a pretty good amount of concerts and that kind of stuff going on here. That was the trend, is if you wanted to see your bands, you had to pony up for a ticket and, go see a concert live.
Right.
Back in the 80s, right? So what happened then after that in the 90s? So
Now we're gonna get
we're
to the
80s, we're
90s.
teenagers, we're all graduating high school, at least for my generation, right? Because I'm 50. I'm not ashamed to say we're 50 and 51. So the late 80s, we're graduating high school, some going to college, some starting families, whatever we're doing in the early 90s. Then what happens to metal? Because
I think 90s grunge killed metal.
right, so grunge comes along and metal kind of takes a back seat to the grunge movement.
Yeah.
And what happens to our power metal scene at that time?
It goes underground.
So it goes underground, but does it disappear?
No, it does not.
So what can you recall from the 90s, like the early 90s, about our scene?
Wow. Well, still bands were still making albums, even though they weren't out in the forefront. You had Quiet Riot, Rat, Motley Crue. They were still putting them out, but there was this grunge thing that got in the way.
Right.
And I'm like, dude, get the fuck out of our way.
So did you notice that other genres of metal kind of came to the forefront at that time too, though? I mean,
Some
think
of
about
them.
it. The death metal movement started
Yeah.
and really came to the forefront and pushed a lot of that power underground at that time. And then, of course, the internet.
Oh yeah.
So mid to late 90s, the internet comes into play, and
That changes everything.
it changes everything, right? So, do you remember when you got the internet?
Oh my god. Oh shit. It was around the 90s when I first got the old style of AOL dial-up.
Oh my God.
And, you started getting, like Napster and
Sure.
things of that
Oh
nature.
yeah, the sharing
The
platforms.
sharing platform started in, and then everybody was on top of that. And, of course, I was in the mix of that, and I'm like, damn, here's where we're at.
The internet opened up a lot of options, I think, for a lot of us to share music quickly and be able to, be like, dude, have you ever heard of this band? Well, here, let me send it to you, and be able to hear stuff in real time and go, wow, this is crazy. And then pretty soon your music collection grows from, a dozen or 50 to 100 bands to 1,000 in the split second of, holy shit, there's so much out there. I mean, I remember the same thing.
Right.
Like 96, 97, getting a computer and being able to dial in and talk to people all over the world, but mostly in the country, about what bands we liked, and then, have you ever heard of, and they sound
Right.
like this,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, the whole world is like opening up, and you're just like, holy shit. But I do recall at that time being like, for me, sinking back into re-listening to a lot of the old music that had been out for 10 years, because there wasn't a whole lot of new stuff at that time.
Right.
In that vein or that genre coming out, because, Maiden wasn't really putting out a whole lot of new stuff at that time, and the stuff that was coming out wasn't nearly, the mid-'80s or, late 80s Maiden that it was. And there were some other mediocre, I mean, I'll always being a critic, right?
Right.
Of our favorite bands and that kind of stuff. And then I would say for me the turning point was like the tail end of the millennia coming to an end in 97, 98. And that whole thing that came out of Sweden and
Oh yeah.
and Hammerfall and all of that resurgence of our power metal started happening again at the turn of the millennium, and it was like, whoa. You know, and now we've got the internet, we've got sharing stream platforms, we've got, I don't remember when Facebook happened, but we had MySpace, right?
Right.
MySpace is coming up in the early 2000s, and now all of a sudden,
boom,
everything's happening.
Well, I tell you what, something that has always been in music, and it still is today, that is vinyls.
That is vinyl, right? I've been
and
collecting vinyl since Columbia House. Do you remember Columbia House?
Oh, hell yeah.
You know, for a penny, and then you get 10 free, and then you never paid the fucking bill because you had to buy like 12 or 13.
That was with cassettes.
Oh, it was cassettes or vinyls, but mine started out as vinyl.
Yeah, well, mine started out as cassettes, and even the cassettes are making a comeback today.
Right. I see a lot of bands trying to do it. I think the problem with that is that nobody makes cassette players anymore.
Well, for collection and
Sure.
collectible, being collectible, I think that's a great idea.
But I hear what you were telling me before we started, when we were kind of kicking around the podcast, was that cassettes are more expensive to make, even more so than vinyl, I think.
Yeah, almost the same for what I've been reading, and I'm like, damn, that's sad. I mean, it's really sad. I mean, it should be like cut it in half,
It's right down the middle.
Right down the middle.
Okay, Mike. Well, and it's funny because when we just moved recently, and I was digging in a box, and I was like, oh, I pulled an old Fear of the Dark tape, cassette tape, and I'm just like chuckling to myself, like, well, this is great. I'm going to keep it for its nostalgia value. It's Fear of the Dark. I'm not going to throw it out, but I'm like, honestly, I have no idea, and I have no platform. I can't put that into anything and play it. I have no cassette player. I have no old Walkman floating around anywhere. There's no place that I could pop that cassette in and play it. It's literally just a piece of plastic and a bunch of tape that means nothing other than the cool little plastic container it comes in with the liner notes and the fold-out dealio,
Yeah, that's when you frame it.
Right? Because I don't have enough Iron Maiden swag already,
exactly.
Right? But it's kind of a silly, thought process of, what happened when the internet came out, and now all of a sudden people are no longer, other than collectors and whatnot, buying those things. And then now we're all doing Napster and LimeWire, and we're sharing stuff and that kind of thing. So the 2000s come and go, and now power metal's making its resurgence, and now we can kind of fast forward a little bit to now. So there's new festivals, and there's a new breath of life comes into our scene, and people are traveling all over the world, and there's big festivals now everywhere. They've got Rock in Rio in Brazil, and they've got large festivals popping up all over, and Sweden's got multiple great festivals, and Germany and Italy, and they've got the Bloodstock in the UK, and now Ty's doing Mad with Power, and we've got Prog Power in Atlanta, and there's all these power metal oriented things. Reggie's the one we were just talking about.
Legions of Metal,
and the Canadian festival that they've been doing now up in British Columbia. I think it's British Columbia in Vancouver. So our scene is kind of got a whole new, huge fucking momentum behind it. And now we fast forward to today. And, for the last 3 years, we've been focusing on, 3 hours of underground power metal bands on our radio show every week. And how it's amazing how we find the just amazing amount of talented fucking slamming power metal from all different parts of the world, that if you were to go back to to the 80s or even just the 90s when we were on AOL and go, holy shit, the magnitude of talent, and it sounds like it would come from that Halloween era, or that that Accept era, or that even to the Blind Guardian, or just to throw out some of the genres that we love, that we consider to be iconic in our scene. And it's just crazy how it's almost like it's evolved and then devolved, and it's come back to its roots, and we found such an amazing love, almost a rekindling of that romance that we had for our power metal back in the day.
Well, speaking of that, I found bands lately that are bringing back the 80s hair metal feel.
Sure,
with all these new bands. You know, and I am so happy about that because that was my heyday. This is something I have a passion for, is 80s hair bands.
Absolutely.
And you know, and they've always had a heart with me, especially Twisted Sister. That was one of my favorites.
Right.
And the reason for that, if you want to know, is because they had that rebellious,
right,
stuff in their lyrics and stuff. It doesn't mean you had to go out and start busting up shit, but they had that rebellious kind of attitude back then, and that really made me feel like, hey, I belong.
Absolutely.
I can relate to that.
Well, and that brings us back, circles us back around to our culture and how our metal family, so to speak, and what we talk about, how that has that changed. And it really has, and it really hasn't. I mean, we've always wanted to belong to a culture as metalheads, right?
Right.
From that day forward. I mean, I remember being young and being a teenager, like you said. You were, fuck the man, or I'm going to, anti-establishment or anti-authority, and being a part of that select group of people who listen to a very specific type of music, and we all belonged to that group.
Right.
And we were all one big family. And that transcended over those decades when we all connected on AOL. And then we all started meeting at festivals in different countries. I've had friends that would, make friends in the groups, and then they would meet. And I've done this myself. I mean, I met people in New York City. We would get together and meet up at concerts. And I'm still friends with my AOL chat buddies to this day on Facebook. We all transcended all of these technological advances to be friends in real life and still existing on media. But that resurgence that we've got now has kind of, we're still a part of that really important culture. But it's changed in a lot of ways because we're older, we're wiser, a lot of us have families, we're invested in things, and we all have opinions about things that are more important than just being a teenager and wanting to just drive and meet boys or girls.
Boy, isn't that truth.
Fall in love. Right. It's become a political machine. It's become a dividing line when it comes to human rights, when it comes to lots of things.
Well, even when it comes between genres.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People are fighting about even cross-genring and labeling and stuff.
I mean, I used to be one of those people. Now, I've told Lord before, and I'll tell a lot of people, black metal, death metal is just not my thing.
Right.
But it has its place.
Right.
And people love it, go for it. And if it does something for your life, go for it. But power metal will always be my go-to.
That's your favorite.
Will be my go-to. It does something for me. So, there shouldn't be no okay, you're going straight to hell because you listen to black metal, or you're going straight to hell because you listen to heavy metal. That shouldn't matter at all.
I think the takeaway, or the really important thing that people don't realize is that, and I'm guilty of it too, back in the day when AOL was a big thing and we were all in chat, there was a lot of bullying going on Facebook or on AOL, and still to this day on Facebook, where people are drawing lines in the sand about political issues and about that kind of shit, which is just stupid. But we're doing it in our own culture, in our own family, over our music.
Yeah.
And that's to me, it's no different than when we were in the 80s and they were like, oh, you like Poison, poser.
Yeah, exactly.
And to a certain extent, back in the day, that was part of our identity. That was part of us giving each other shit. But at the end of the day, you could like Poison and I'd still be your friend.
Right.
Today, it's gotten a lot worse because I think people are just so non-accepting that I can love Iron Maiden as my favorite band, but I can also appreciate and love Obituary for what it is, because it played an important part of my life in the early 90s.
Well, there you go.
But it's not my preferred genre to go listen to all the death metal because I'm like you. I don't prefer guttural vocals.
Right.
But when I'm angry, I want to listen to some Obituary because it makes me feel angry in that moment and it helps me cope. But that's what music's supposed to do.
Exactly.
But with our culture, it's we have to realize that even though we're all adults and we have very different opinions about the way the world looks as adults, we don't have to be assholes about it. We all need to be good humans, regardless.
Yeah.
And as a metal culture, as a metal family, it's okay for us to agree to disagree about music.
Right.
But we also need to agree to disagree about the more important things in life, too, and treat everybody in our metal family like they are family and have that same respect about all other things. If you're a garbage human and you're in my metal family, you're a garbage human.
That doesn't change anything.
And you're toxic, and I'm going to kick you the fuck out my door. But if you're cool, you can like whatever genre of music you want. But I'm going to have an open-minded thought process about what you beauty's in the ear of the beholder. This great group that I'm in, we had a big talk discussion about it, and it just made me really think about how, you know, it's okay to like what you like. As long as it brings out that emotion in you and makes you feel good, I don't give a fuck what it is, you know. And it's interesting how people really digest that. But it's changed. I think our culture's changed, but it's also come back and kind of recircles around upon itself sometimes.
And I think a big part of what people need to understand, this goes for bands, this goes for people in general.
Fans, yeah.
Fans, is that, you know, if you want to play 80s hair metal, let them play 80s hair metal.
Right.
If they want to play power metal, let them play power metal. Don't bash other people because of what they like to listen to.
Absolutely. I just think it's also, we've talked about this in general life, but especially in our culture, we're always going to be able to sit down with somebody who listens to metal and find one band that we have in common that we like.
That's right.
You're always going to, because it's super easy for us to go, well, I don't like that band, or I don't like that band, or I don't like that band. It's even easier for you to always come back around and go, well, what about, you know, Guns N' Roses or AC/DC, the quintessential band that nobody really hates?
Right.
How can you hate AC/DC? Seriously.
You can't.
But you can always find something in common with somebody in our genre, and go, okay, well, I got to give you that.
Right.
I mean, not everybody is an uber Manowar fan. You either love them or hate them. Not everybody's an uber Halloween fan, for that matter. But you have to respect their contribution to the scene,
That's
regardless
true.
if you love them or hate them.
Yeah.
But you can always find that commonality with somebody in our metal family, regardless of whether they're like the most diehard death metal fan, you know, or they're like you and I and they like power metal,
Right.
you know, or maybe they're a prog snob, for that matter. I know lots of prog snobs, and they're some of the nicest, most wonderful people on the planet. But that doesn't mean that their music is better than mine.
No.
It just means that it's different, you know. But as far as, I think I'm super grateful that right now it seems like our power metal scene right now, it's changed, and it's changed a lot for the better. I mean, the culture's great, but I also think that technology has really given us the ability to really spotlight it, share it. You know, that's all genres really, but
Right.
for our scene right now, it's pretty fantastic. And I know there's, you know, it ebbs and it flows, and there's, you know, it's like a roller coaster ride. Some months it's really awesome, spot on, and some months it doesn't seem like there's anything real new or good out there.
It just happens.
And that's frustrating.
You know, and through a damn pandemic here, you know, you're gonna have to expect that. I mean, you can't really get out and go do gigs and concerts and whatnot because of this shit that just happened in our whole country and outside the whole world, basically.
Right.
So, but, you know, it's coming back. It's going to be here. It's going to stay. And there's nobody can do anything about it.
Right. Well, I, for one, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for technology giving us the ability to, number one, share great music from all over the world with everybody, and two, for giving us the ability to have an outlet. I mean, without Metal Messiah Radio and without, you know, YouTube and without everything, we really wouldn't have a platform for that outlet. We'd still be going to King Records and buying vinyl and just, you know, sitting in the house spinning vinyl, which there's nothing wrong with that, but, you know, it's a lot different than it used to be. Being able to share it with people would only be, you know, that once every couple of months going to a concert and going, hey, check this band out, you know.
Totally.
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 So, but again, thanks for the great idea, Pudel, for talking about how, you know, power metal's changed for us over the years, and we're interested to hear what you guys think. How do you think, you know, the music scene's changed, or what are some of your favorite memories from back in the day? And, you know, hit us up in the comments, and if you like it, share, subscribe, punch the like button, give us some tips, talk to us, because that's what we do here. So,
That's right.
Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll be back maybe next week, right?
Right.
All right. Well, take care.